A broke black businessman pulled over to help a woman walking alone in the rain barefoot, in a silk dress, clutching a broken purse like it held her last hope. She didn't thank him. She just asked, "Can you drive without asking questions?" He nodded. But as the silence deepened and her eyes stayed on the rearview mirror, something felt off. Who was she running from? And why did it feel like she wasn't the one in danger? If you've ever felt that some people carry secrets too heavy for words, stay with us. And if this story stirs something in you, consider liking, subscribing, or sharing it forward. The air was thick with summer dust, the kind that settled heavy on the skin and made everything feel more tired than it already was. Pinewood Park sat on the edge of Cleveland like an afterthought, its cracked benches and broken light posts long forgotten by the city. Malik Johnson knelt beside his beat-up Camry, sleeves rolled up, hands black with grease, the fourth flat tire in 2 weeks. He tightened the lug nuts slowly, methodically, like he had nowhere else to be and all the time in the world to pretend otherwise. He wasn't in a rush. He hadn't been in years. Not since Bite Bloom collapsed under accusations no one ever proved, and his name became a footnote in someone else's success story. Then he heard the rustle. It wasn't the kind of sound that belonged in an empty park. Malik glanced up. A girl, no, a woman, though barely stumbled from the edge of the trees. Her hair was a mess of loose curls sticking to her cheeks, her dress smeared with mud, one strap fallen off her shoulder. Her right heel was broken. She looked like she had escaped something she wasn't supposed to survive. "Please," she said, voice low but urgent. "I need help. They're looking for me." Malik didn't ask who. He didn't ask why. He just popped open the back door. She hesitated for half a second, then slipped in and curled into herself. The car sagged slightly with her weight. He caught a glimpse of her face in the rearview mirror. Pale skin, wide eyes, lips trembling. But her jaw stayed firm. Malik slid into the driver's seat, wiped his hands on a rag, and turned the ignition. The engine sputtered, then caught. They drove in silence. No names, no questions. At the first gas station past Shaker Heights, Malik pulled in to fill the tank and grab coffee. The air inside the station was thick with burnt sugar and stale popcorn. When he stepped out, 3 black SUVs had boxed in his car. The men stepped out fast. Black suits, no smiles. One of them flashed a metal badge with Sinclair Holdings engraved across it. His voice was hard. "You haven't seen anyone. Especially not Vanessa Sinclair. She's not supposed to be in your car." Malik didn't flinch, but his fingers tensed around the gas pump. That name Sinclair was a name he hadn't said out loud in 5 years. It echoed in courtrooms, in server logs, in the footnotes of the articles that ruined him. And now she was sitting in his back seat. One of the men stepped closer. "You're going to forget this. Drive away, like nothing happened." Another stepped to the passenger side, squinting in. Vanessa ducked down, pressing herself into the shadows. Malik didn't move. He met their stare, long enough to make it uncomfortable. Then he said, quietly, "Tank's not full yet." The men held their ground, but after a beat too long, they backed off. One left a card on the windshield. "For your trouble," he said. They pulled away just as fast as they'd arrived, tires hissing on hot asphalt. Malik slid back into the driver's seat, started the car again, and didn't say a word. Vanessa still hadn't looked up, but in the mirror, he saw her hand tremble once then stop, like she'd just realized something had changed. The road past East 55th narrowed into silence, where concrete met rust and light didn't try too hard. Malik turned off the headlights as they pulled behind the abandoned warehouse, tucked between the back wall of the old Greyhound bus terminal and a fenced lot piled with forgotten city signs. He had fixed the security system here once, back when the place was a makeshift storage space for city transit, before it turned into what it was now: no lights, no lock, no paperwork. Vanessa followed him in without a word. The steel door groaned open under his weight, and the musty smell of metal and damp cardboard met them like a memory too old to name. Malik clicked on the flashlight from his phone, leading the way across a floor scattered with dust and old delivery receipts. He laid down a thin military blanket he'd kept in his trunk for years. Not soft, but warmer than cold concrete. He poured lukewarm water into 2 chipped mugs from the thermos, passed one to her. She sat without ceremony, back pressed against a stack of boxes, knees up, arms wrapped around herself. The tremble in her hand had subsided, but her eyes stayed alert. "You got a name?" Malik asked, not looking up from his cup. There was a pause. Then she said, "Vanessa." Her voice was clearer now. Vanessa Sinclair. The silence that followed felt too clean, too sharp. Malik didn't ask if it was a joke. He just nodded once. Slow. "Are they family?" he asked, motioning vaguely to the night, the men in suits, the weight she carried. "Unfortunately, yes." She stared ahead, past him, at nothing. Then the words came not all at once, but like she was trying to make sense of something that still didn't feel real. "My father doesn't forgive. He makes you disappear. One mistake, and he'll erase you from paper, from memory. That's what he does best." She reached into her coat, slowly, carefully, and pulled out something small. Her fingers brushed the top of her blouse, checking twice before revealing the flash drive. It was plain, gray plastic, the kind sold in packs of 10. She held it out like it weighed more than it should. Malik didn't take it right away. "What's on it? I don't know all of it. Contracts, emails. I copied everything I could during a meeting. The kind where assistants are told to step out, and the real deals are done in the dark." He took it then, fingers brushing hers for a second longer than needed. "If I don't wake up tomorrow," she said, "make sure this sees daylight." He exhaled. The old ache in his chest came back, the one he hadn't felt since Bite Bloom crumbled under accusations no one could trace, after his servers went dark and his investors disappeared. He remembered one error log, one name in the root server trail, R. Sinclair admin. He looked at her again, really looked this time. There wasn't fear in her eyes. There was grit, that strange steadiness people had when they'd finally chosen their side. She leaned back against the crate behind her, exhaustion creeping in now that there was nothing left to run from, at least for the moment. He checked his phone. Still no signal. She didn't carry one. "We can't let them trace us," she had said, like it was second nature. Malik stood and moved toward the warehouse window, careful not to step on anything that would echo. Outside, the streets were quiet, but too quiet. Then came the sound. Not loud, not sudden, but slow and unmistakable. An engine, low gear, easing to a stop. A second later, the crunch of tires on broken glass. No headlights. He turned to her, and she was already standing. "Someone's found us," she whispered. He didn't answer. He just reached down, slipped the USB into the lining of his boot, and stepped toward the door without looking back. By the time the sun broke over the Lake Erie horizon, they were already blocks away from the warehouse. Malik drove the Camry slow, avoiding main roads and traffic cameras. Vanessa sat hunched in the passenger seat, hoodie up, eyes fixed on the street signs like they were warnings instead of directions. Neither of them spoke until they reached Superior Avenue, where the shop stood, tucked between a shuttered pawn store and a Jamaican bakery that hadn't opened yet. Malik parked around the corner and knocked 3 times on the side door of a locksmith business. After a minute, it cracked open, revealing a lean figure in sweatpants and a long-sleeve t-shirt that read, "Techs Don't Lie." Ray Castellanos squinted against the morning light, then grinned softly. "So, you're back from the grave too." His voice hadn't changed, but the lines around his eyes had deepened. He stepped aside to let them in. The basement stairs creaked, and the air inside was a mix of soldered wires, old coffee, and damp insulation. Screens lined the wall, most turned off. A few blinked with code. A cot in the corner. A single red thermos on the desk. It was clear Ray didn't entertain much company. Vanessa stayed standing while Malik made the introductions. She scanned the space like someone who didn't believe in walls anymore. Malik handed Ray the USB without flourish. We need to know what's on it. And if it's real. Ray took it, turned it once in his fingers, and plugged it into the rig without a word. Lines of directories spilled onto the screen. At first, it was standard spreadsheets, memos, scanned documents. Then the folders began to show timestamps, IP routes, and flagged threads from Sinclair Holdings' legal division. Ray leaned in. Emails with coded subject lines, encrypted PDF attachments, references to city accounts, wire transfers routed through state grants meant for infrastructure projects, vendor contracts with price discrepancies, and at the center names, real ones. Malik stepped closer, reading the display. He froze at the sight of two signatures on a 2020 contract. One belonged to a city councilman who had publicly denounced ByteBloom. The other was a banking officer who had pulled Malik's credit line overnight. Vanessa finally spoke. Her voice cracked. This isn't even half of it. Ray sat back slowly, one hand rubbing the bridge of his nose. You two realize this isn't just about her father. You're poking at a structure, something that's been layered for years. He clicked open a folder labeled RS Node 7. A stream of code filled the screen network commands, access logs, internal hacks. Among them, one file caught his eye. Ray clicked it. Text opened in plain view. ByteBloom shut down coordination. Phase 3. He said nothing for a long time. Then, turning to Malik, he added, You were on a list. ByteBloom wasn't some casualty. They planned your fall, every step. The weight of the room shifted. Vanessa's knuckles whitened around her sleeve. Malik didn't say anything. He just stared at the screen like it might blink away the truth. Ray looked between them. The question isn't whether this is real, he said. It's whether anyone out there is ready to believe it. Malik thought of the investors who had stopped returning calls, the news anchors who only quoted Sinclair's side, the silence that swallowed his name when the lawsuits dropped. Outside, the bakery's metal gate finally rattled open, and on the screen, the mouse hovered over another file, one that simply read, Asset Recovery, ByteBloom IP Logs. The sky was thick with gray when Malik pulled into the gravel driveway in Glenville. The house stood like it always had, small, solid, a single porch light casting a soft glow even in daylight. The cross above the Pentecostal church next door peeked over the roofline, and Malik could hear the low hum of choir rehearsal echoing through the alley. He hadn't been back in over 6 months, not since his last job, fixing a copier for a neighborhood office that never paid. Vanessa sat still in the passenger seat, hoodie still drawn, hands clasped in her lap. She didn't ask where they were. She didn't need to. Malik opened the door first. The front steps creaked under his weight before he could knock. The door opened with the familiar swish of wood on linoleum. Loretta Johnson stood in the doorway, arms crossed, lips pressed thin. Her gray curls were wrapped in a pale green scarf, and she wore a housecoat with the sleeves pushed up to her elbows. You're not dragging some white girl drama into this house. Malik, he didn't flinch. He just stepped back, motioned for Vanessa to follow. Just for an hour. Mama, we need to sit down. Loretta looked at the girl, at the dirt on her sleeves, the quiet weight in her posture. Something in her expression softened, but not much. She stepped aside. Inside, the house was still the same brown couch with the throw blanket she crocheted years ago, the same side table holding 3 picture frames, one with Malik's high school graduation photo, one with a photo of her late husband, still in his paramedic uniform. The third frame was empty. Vanessa sat on the edge of the couch, spine straight. Loretta brought in a glass of water but didn't offer it directly. She placed it on the table with a quiet clink. I know who her father is, Loretta said. Finally, I seen him once. Came into South Point with a lawyer and 2 bodyguards. Told my supervisor to clean up a file for some poor man who got his liver ruptured on a job site. My supervisor told me to do it. I said no. 2 weeks later, they said we lost our grant funding. She didn't look at Vanessa as she spoke. She looked at Malik. I kept copies. Because one day, I knew somebody would come knocking with more questions than time. Vanessa's fingers had stopped moving, her eyes wide but steady. turned toward Loretta with something softer than gratitude. More like recognition, a kind of painful respect. Malik leaned forward, elbows on his knees. What kind of copies Loretta stood. Walked down the hallway with that same limp she'd had since the fall 2 winters ago. Came back with a canvas tote, dropped it gently onto the table. In there, she said. Patient records, notes they said didn't matter, and this. She held up a small, worn flash drive wrapped in a rubber band. From 2017. I had a friend pull it from the hospital archive before they wiped the server. Vanessa reached forward slowly, as if touching it would make something too real. She didn't take it. Not yet. Loretta watched her. I'm not saying you're lying, but people like your daddy, they don't just build companies. They build erasers, so you better know what you're doing. The room went quiet again. Outside, a siren wailed faintly across town. In the back room, a clock ticked. Malik opened the tote, leafed through the folders, dates, medical scans, notes in Loretta's own handwriting. It was more than anyone had trusted him with in years. Vanessa finally looked up. That file he wanted erased. She asked quietly, "Do you remember the patient's name?" Loretta nodded. Ethan Greaves, construction foreman, real polite man, never made it out of recovery. Malik's breath caught. That name had come up once before, long ago. In a redacted contract Vanessa had mentioned the night before. Cliffhanger came in the silence after. Loretta picked up the tote, placed it into Vanessa's arms, then turned and walked into the kitchen. "If you're serious," she said without turning back, "start from here." The sun over Cleveland had turned to cloud, and the stillness in Ray's basement was deeper than silence. Malik spread out the documents across the long desk, the worn edges of the paper curling upward like they'd waited too long to be seen. The yellowing scans, the printed notes, the blurry signatures, all of it carried a stale weight. Vanessa hovered beside him, arms folded tight, jaw clenched. Ray leaned in. His eyes followed the lines with an engineer's attention and a whistle low in his throat. The file in question bore the name Ethan Greaves, listed as a non-urgent trauma patient, but the discharge form had a note scribbled in the corner. No further intervention, recommended palliative only. And just beneath it, a payout form, $300,000, transferred from a supplemental insurance fund, signed off by 2 Sinclair legal officers. Ray's voice dropped. This wasn't sloppy. This was structured. It's not just one dirty form, it's a chain, a design. Vanessa sat down slowly. She didn't speak, but her eyes hadn't left the name. She mouthed it once, Ethan, and blinked hard. Malik noticed. He didn't press her. "He worked for us," she said, voice thin, brittle. "He used to drive my father to the regional offices. Always showed up early. He'd bring me peanut butter sandwiches when I forgot lunch. Then one day, he just stopped coming." Malik turned to her. "You never asked what happened. I did. Once. My father told me, some people don't belong in the room." Her hands gripped the edge of the table like she needed something solid. Malik clicked through Ray's printer, making clean copies of the scans, the records, the forms. He scanned each one with his phone, uploading them to an encrypted folder stored off-site. Habit born from betrayal. You keep your truth in more than one place. Vanessa stood abruptly and moved toward the narrow balcony off the alley side of the building. She didn't ask for space, but her back said enough. Malik hesitated, then followed. Outside, the wind cut sharper than it had an hour ago. Vanessa leaned against the iron rail, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the street below. "He used to hum when he drove," she said quietly. Never the words, just the tune. "I thought he got another job, that he left us." She wiped her cheek, almost impatiently. "I didn't know he was erased." Malik didn't speak. He stood beside her, his shoulder just brushing hers, offering no words, just presence, back inside. Ray was digging deeper into the drive Loretta had handed over. The folders had no labels, just numbers, sometimes dates, some lines of code. One folder was unusually small, Inside it, a single audio file, 22 seconds long. Ray clicked play. The voice was low, raspy, male. Richard, the drugs weren't mine. I didn't ask for this. Just tried to leave. The static at the end made Ray reach for the volume, adjusting it gently, like not to disturb the dead. He looked up just as the basement lights flickered once, twice, then blacked out completely. The monitors went dark. The only sound left was the dying hum of the ventilation fan, slowing to a stop. Malik stepped back inside, tensed. Vanessa followed, already reaching for her phone, though she knew it was useless, no signal in a dead power zone. Ray moved fast, grabbed the USB, pocketed it. This place runs on backup, but I didn't trip it. Then came the noise, tires screeching outside, sudden and sharp. A car pulling up too fast. Then silence. Vanessa turned toward the stairs, her voice barely a breath. Someone found us. The building sat behind a rusted chain-link gate off East 79th, tucked into a stretch of converted warehouses that had outlived their purpose. Brick cracked along the seams, paint peeled like tired skin. But the brass plaque next to the door still read, Reyes and Associates, Civil and Criminal Defense. Clara Reyes answered on the second knock. She looked like someone who'd once worn heels and courtroom suits, but had traded both for jeans and worn boots with stitching along the sides. Her hair was pulled back in a neat coil, but her eyes, those hadn't softened in years. "You look older," she said to Malik, not unkindly. "You look the same," he replied, stepping inside. Vanessa followed quietly. Ray brought up the rear, the canvas tote slung over one shoulder, the USB drive in his jacket. The office smelled like old paper and strong coffee. Desks were pushed together into one long workspace. Legal pads covered in scrawled notes were stacked beside case binders marked with red tabs. A single window let in light through bars that had been painted over twice. Clara sat, arms crossed, listening as Malik laid it out what they'd found, what they suspected, who Vanessa was. She didn't interrupt. But when Ray slid over the USB and clicked open the folders, something in her shifted. "I've seen this handwriting before," she said, almost to herself. She leaned forward, eyes narrowing at a form titled Palliative Disbursement, Fast Track Protocol. The signature at the bottom wasn't Richard Sinclair's. It was someone else's, her former supervisor from the Attorney General's office. The same man who'd pulled her off a healthcare fraud investigation mid-deposition 5 years ago, claiming jurisdictional overreach. "I got pushed out for refusing to redact a report," Clara said flatly. "I remember this file. It went missing right before the quarterly audit." Vanessa watched her closely. There was a silent recognition building between them, two women from different worlds, both bent by the same pressure. "You still practicing?" Malik asked. Clara gave a half shrug. "I take cases no one else wants. Lost causes, gray areas, people who can't pay." She turned back to the screen, clicking through emails that detailed internal Sinclair conversations coded language, misaligned timelines, contracts funneled through shell accounts. "What exactly are you planning to do with this?" she asked. "We don't know yet," Ray admitted. "We're still figuring out who we can trust." Clara stood, walked to a shelf near the window, pulled out a folder from a locked drawer. Inside was a contact sheet, yellowed and folded. She ran her finger down the names, stopped halfway, then reached for her phone. "This person," she said, holding the phone up, "still works in the prosecutor's office. He owes me a favor and knows how to verify these." Quietly. As the call connected, her tone changed professional, clipped, practiced. Within minutes, she had confirmation Richard Sinclair was scheduled to appear at a high-profile fundraising gala at the Hyatt Regency in Columbus. Dozens of major donors, press, live coverage, an open floor for anyone bold enough to crash it. Clara hung up and looked at Malik. "If you want this to matter," she said, her voice low but steady, "you'll need someone who can get this in front of the right eyes and survive the fallout. I'll go with you." Malik nodded, grateful but wary. Vanessa said nothing, but there was a flicker in her expression, something softening, letting go of the idea that she had to do this alone. Ray, back at his laptop, leaned forward suddenly. Guys, they turned to him. His face was pale. I just got a signal ping. An anonymous message. He spun the screen toward them. One line glowed in the chat window. Stop digging. You're not bulletproof. They stared at the screen, the cursor blinking like a quiet warning in the dark. The bakery sat on the corner of East 30th and Payne Avenue, its windows fogged with morning heat, the smell of red bean buns and sesame oil warming the glass from within. Malik stood under the faded awning, scanning the passers-by out of habit. He hadn't seen Evan Kim in over 5 years, back when the kid was all oversized hoodies, second-hand laptops, and a brain wired for code like no one Malik had ever mentored before. Evan showed up 5 minutes early. He was leaner now, sharper around the edges. The boy who once tripped over cables had become a man who moved with quiet precision. Dress shirt, rolled sleeves, messenger bag slung across his chest. His hair was still messy in a way that looked accidental, but wasn't. Malik, Evan said, simply. They shook hands, and Malik felt a jolt of something age, maybe, or time. Inside, they took a booth near the back, behind a low divider that gave just enough cover from wandering eyes. Vanessa sat beside Malik, watching Evan carefully. She hadn't spoken yet. I know who you are, Evan said, looking at her without judgment. You're the reason this got interesting again? Malik leaned in. We need help. Evan nodded, already unzipping his bag. I stayed quiet after Bite Bloom collapsed. Got a job with CipherSafe. They subcontract with federal agencies now. I do packet inspection, protocol audits, backdoor tracing. I see everything. He pulled out a matte, black external drive, thin as a paperback. I cloned the server logs before they wiped them. I don't know why I kept them. Fear, maybe, or guilt. He connected the drive to his laptop, turned the screen toward them. Strings of log files scrolled across the monitor timestamps, IP addresses, packet IDs. Evan moved through them with muscle memory, fingers gliding across the keys. This, he said, stopping at a folder named RS Predict 3, is the exploit they used. Custom coded to mask packet origin while mimicking internal Bite Bloom behavior. You were never hacked from outside. They had someone inside your protocol loop. Malik said nothing. His jaw tensed. Evan clicked open another file rooting logs. And here's where it gets worse. He pulled up a script set to run every 6 hours. It encrypted and forwarded select transaction data, mostly valuation metrics, trend predictions, investment models. Look at the destination. Vanessa leaned closer. Finance Air Sinclair Trust. Net. They were feeding your work into an investment shell, using your own predictive modeling to short your investors and pump competitors they controlled. Malik exhaled, slow and bitter. His hands clenched around the edge of the table. You thought you were finished, Evan said softly. But they never stopped using your work. Vanessa looked at Malik. Really looked. For a moment, all the tension in her shoulders gave way to something heavier regret, maybe, or shame. Evan closed the laptop gently. I was going to send this to the press once. I had everything. But they'd find me. I knew they would. I'm safer working with you than shouting into the void. They sat in silence for a few seconds. The bakery filled with the sound of steam hissing and a radio playing quiet K-pop from a tinny speaker. Then Vanessa's phone buzzed. It wasn't the new one Ray had given her. It was the old number, the one she thought disconnected. A number that hadn't been used since her mother disappeared from public life. She looked down. One message. Don't go to Columbus. You're not safe there. I made a mistake. Her hands went cold. She showed it to Malik without speaking. And just like that, the world shifted again. The drive to Columbus was quiet, the kind of silence that holds its breath. They didn't talk much, no strategy, no reassurances, just the hum of tires and the weight of what they were about to do. Malik sat behind the wheel of the rented black SUV, registered under a media shell Clara had set up a decade ago for whistleblower defense cases. In the back. Vanessa adjusted her earpiece for the third time, staring out the window like she wasn't entirely sure she existed in this moment. Clara sat next to her, flipping through a folded event map. Evan and Ray followed in a separate sedan, their gear already configured in the hotel's guest Wi-Fi under a spoofed admin network. By the time they pulled into the valley lane at the Hyatt Regency, the evening air was thick with cologne, designer wool, and cameras. A banner hung above the grand doors, Future by Design, the Sinclair vision for a connected democracy. It was branded in gold, flanked by tech logos, and backed by donor lists long enough to make a senator blush. Inside the lobby, chandeliers lit faces that smiled for money and remembered every betrayal by name. Malik's tie was crooked. No one cared. Vanessa walked ahead, heels quiet on marble. Her black dress was modest by the room's standard, but it did something the gowns around her didn't. It told the truth. She looked like someone not pretending. Clara broke off from the group, blending into a cluster of legal staff by the espresso bar. Evan and Ray messaged from upstairs they'd bypassed the media loop. The screens lining the ballroom would be theirs in less than 10 minutes. Malik stayed near the side wall, behind a column. He watched as Richard Sinclair stepped on stage, flanked by 2 former governors and a tech fund CEO who had once called Malik a fraud in a live panel during ByteBloom's final weeks. That man now stood at the podium, voice smooth and clear. It was Richard who taught me that real innovation begins not in code, but in courage. Malik's hands stayed in his pockets, his jaw locked. Behind him, someone whispered, "You don't look like someone who forgives easily." He turned Vanessa, now alone. Clara had vanished back into the crowd. "You ready?" Malik asked. "Not yet." Her eyes moved across the room. That's when she saw her, Marianne Sinclair, her mother. She stood by the buffet table, her hand hovering over a tray of shrimp cocktails she hadn't touched. Her dress was elegant, her earrings discreet, but her face, there was no hiding that kind of tired. Not the makeup, not the posture. Vanessa moved without thinking. She reached her, heart racing, throat dry. Marianne turned slowly. Her gaze met Vanessa's like she had expected this moment. "You shouldn't be here," Marianne said quietly. "I could say the same to you," Vanessa replied. Her mother didn't flinch. She leaned in, voice hushed, eyes darting toward the camera crew near the press booth. "He had someone follow you," she said. "Your phone was never off. He knew. From the beginning." Vanessa's stomach dropped. "What, you were never gone? Vanessa, you were traced." The sound in the ballroom dulled. Somewhere, a string quartet started playing, almost apologetically. Malik appeared behind her, hand lightly touching her elbow. She looked up at him. The screen at the far end of the room flickered. A voice buzzed in her earpiece. "Ray, sharp, tense, we're in. You've got one shot. Do it now or never." Vanessa turned away from her mother. It happened in the 5th sentence of Richard Sinclair's speech. The ballroom had been quiet in that peculiar, reverent way. High society quiets itself, half out of politeness, half to be seen listening. Cameras rolled. Guests sipped from glasses that cost more than Malik's rent. And phrases like digital equity and new economic frontiers poured from the stage with practiced gravitas. Then came the flicker. One screen, then another. The LED wall behind Richard blinked to black, then stuttered back to life. But instead of his prepared slideshow, a plain text email appeared, time-stamped 6 years ago, its subject line plain "Confirmed takedown." A voice, grainy and low, filled the room. "Your system will fail next week. Make sure ByteBloom takes the blame." The silence was instant and total. Richard hesitated. His fingers hovered over the podium. For a moment, he didn't move at all. Then he turned, gestured frantically toward the AV booth. A technician stood frozen, wide-eyed. As another email hit the screen, this one showing a wire transfer between a shell fund and an executive at the Department of Commerce. In the suite above, Ray muttered, "They're not cutting the signal yet. We're through their switch." Evan worked quickly beside him, decrypting batch files and pushing them live. We've got about 2 minutes before they try to shut down the floor power." Vanessa stood at the back of the ballroom. No one recognized her. Not yet. Her hair was pinned tight, her dress a shade too modest to be designer. She didn't blink. Malik, flanking the side near the tech table, didn't move either. His fist curled around the edge of the setup console, where a row of signal routers buzzed with green light. He watched as slide after slide displayed proof names, dates, signatures. The screen split one side, showing a confidential audit of Sinclair Holdings, the other, a silent clip of ByteBloom's last board meeting. In the video, a younger Malik sat across from two Sinclair appointees, unaware his company was already marked for destruction. Then came a document Clara hadn't seen in 3 years, a contract. Her eyes locked onto the top-line non-disclosure and forfeiture agreement, Delaware Holdings 3B. Her throat went dry. She remembered chasing that contract across 3 counties, only to have it vanish when the judge ruled her evidence insufficient. And now, it was here, public. Projected 10 feet tall above a room full of millionaires and media crews, and standing at the back of the room was someone else she hadn't seen since that trial, Robert Lane, now chief prosecutor for the state of Ohio. He'd been the one who shut down her motion, saying there were no actionable grounds. He stood watching the screen, mouth slightly open. Clara didn't speak. Not yet. In the crowd, voices started to rise. Some leaned in to read, others pulled out phones. Security stepped toward the stage. Richard snapped. He slammed the mic down with a crack. "This is fake," he growled. "Manipulated content. I will sue every last one of you. This is a coordinated attack." But his voice was drowned out by the screens updating again. Then came another voice, soft, clear, not through the speakers, but from within the room. Vanessa stepped forward. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. "Then you'll have to sue your own daughter first." The light caught her just right when she stepped forward. For a moment, Vanessa Sinclair looked like no one at all, just another quiet guest at a glittering event. But as she moved to the center of the ballroom, into the pale spotlight left behind by Richard's retreating presence, a ripple passed through the room like a collective breath being held. Richard had descended from the stage, veins bulging at his temples, rage smothered beneath the last layer of public decorum. When he saw her, it cracked. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, voice low and tight. Vanessa didn't flinch. "I had to," she said. "Someone had to end this." The room went still again. Malik remained in the shadows near the tech booth, eyes locked on her. He didn't move to stop her. This wasn't his fight anymore. It was hers. She didn't shout. She didn't pace. She simply stood there, hands at her sides, and let the words fall out like she'd been carrying them for years. "I believed in this family," she began. "I believed we were doing something important, something good. But ByteBloom wasn't an accident. It wasn't just business. It was destruction, planned and precise, for profit." Her voice wavered only once and then steadied. "You didn't just crash a company. You erased people. You erased names, files, records, pensions, medications. And all of it started because someone asked too many questions, and you didn't want to answer them." A murmur swept through the audience, but no one interrupted. Malik felt it shift. Not just the atmosphere, but the story itself. This wasn't a technical leak anymore. This was memory. This was someone coming forward, not as a whistleblower, but as a daughter. "I was part of it," Vanessa said quietly. "Not in the boardrooms, not with the contracts. But I stayed silent. I knew things didn't add up. I told myself I'd ask one day. I never did. Until now." That's when they stood. First, an older man near the side doors. He wore a faded maintenance uniform. He looked like he hadn't spoken in front of strangers in years. Then a woman in a pale green nurse's jacket. Another in a high school faculty pin. One by one, they rose, not shouting, not grandstanding, just standing. A woman near the center, elderly, voice dry but strong, spoke clearly. "I knew your father's name. I didn't know he had a daughter with a spine." Vanessa blinked, and for a second, her chin trembled. Upstairs. Clara's phone buzzed. She answered, stepping into the hallway, hands shielding her mouth. A moment later, she returned to the booth, breathless. "They did it," she said. "We got a temporary order. The state froze Sinclair Holdings' digital assets. 72 hours minimum. That's our window." Ray cursed under his breath, relief, not anger. Evan, sweating, looked up from his laptop. "Then we have to move everything we've got. Now, but downstairs." The crowd had begun to shift uneasily. Movement behind the curtain. Richard had vanished, and someone else stepped forward, Alex Monroe. Clara's face tightened. A former media strategist with ties to Sinclair's PR teams. Monroe had been floating beneath the radar for years, the kind of man who always looked like a spokesperson, even when he said nothing at all, tall, composed, untouched by the chaos. He took the stage with ease. "Let's give Ms. Sinclair a round of polite applause for her bravery," he said smoothly. "And let's remember, every accusation deserves context. Every leak deserves scrutiny." He looked right at Vanessa then. "You just started a war you can't finish." The air at Dock 3 carried no scent of the lake that lay just beyond it, smelled of rust, of waiting, of something about to end. Vanessa stood still after closing the car door, holding the black notebook tight to her chest. She didn't bring a bag, didn't wear anything too noticeable, just jeans, boots, and a navy coat that once belonged to her mother. Her fingers trembled, not from cold, but from something deeper. Clara had begged her not to go. Malik had followed her down to the lobby, saying nothing, just watching. But she went anyway. The metal door creaked open. Inside, darkness layered itself in folds. Concrete walls breathed cold. Empty crates leaned against each other like relics of a war long over. Fluorescent lights overhead flickered, some dead entirely. She walked carefully, boots echoing with each step, eyes adjusting to the vague outlines of rusted hooks and steel beams. Then a voice, low, familiar. "You always were stubborn," Richard said, emerging from the shadows at the far end of the hall. "You should have stayed away." He looked older than he did on TV, his hair thinner, his posture tired, no security and no jacket, only a father alone and exposed. Vanessa said nothing. He stepped closer. "You've ruined this family. For what justice doesn't put food on your plate? It doesn't pay the rent." She didn't look away. Neither does silence. Not anymore. The black notebook was still in her hand. She placed it on a crate between them, slowly, as if laying down a weapon. Richard glanced at it but didn't move. "I built something that lasted," he said, voice rising just slightly. "I gave you a name that opened doors. Now you want to be the one who slams them shut." "You taught me how to fight," she said quietly. "You just never thought I'd fight you." There was a long silence. His jaw tightened. Then, suddenly, he lunged forward, reaching for the notebook. Vanessa flinched, but didn't stop him. She didn't have to. Before his fingers closed around the leather, light poured through the dock's broken windows, floodlights from outside, strong enough to erase every shadow in the hall. A shout followed, sharp and clear. "Federal agents. Hands where we can see them." From the catwalk above, footsteps pounded. Clara appeared with 2 agents behind her. Malik stood at the far end near the side door, lips pressed tight, nodding once at Vanessa. She hadn't come alone, after all. Richard froze, staring at the notebook in his hand. He turned slowly, eyes darting, calculating until he saw the red laser sight on his chest. One of the agents stepped forward. "Richard Sinclair, you are under arrest on suspicion of wire fraud, conspiracy to obstruct justice, and unauthorized surveillance of protected systems." Richard's mouth opened, then closed. No words came. His shoulders fell. They cuffed him gently, like they already knew who he was. Like they'd been waiting for this for years. Vanessa stood in place, watching, not crying, not blinking. As they led him past her, Richard turned his head slightly, just enough to see her, not enough to speak. A younger agent leaned close to her, Voice almost a whisper. He knew the system too well. You broke the cycle. Vanessa looked down at the crate, now empty. The notebook was gone. But something else had been left behind in its place, a silence that didn't feel hollow. The rain had stopped sometime before dawn, but the streets outside the federal courthouse in Cleveland still glistened like something waiting to dry. A slow line of cars edged toward the courthouse steps, flanked by clusters of people wrapped in windbreakers and holding handmade signs. Justice for Bite Bloom. Loretta was right. We remember. Inside the courthouse, the air was thick, legal documents shuffling, microphones being tested, nerves hanging like fog. Clara moved with quiet certainty, clipboard in hand, her eyes scanning the hallway as she led their small group of witnesses into the courtroom. Some looked hesitant, some looked proud, but none looked away. Loretta Johnson wore the same wool coat she'd worn to work at South Point Hospital for 23 years. In her hands, wrapped carefully in a manila folder, was a printed copy of the falsified patient file from 2017, the same one Richard Sinclair had tried to erase. Her knuckles were white from gripping it. Her chin was steady. Hook cracked open the morning when, just before proceedings formally began, a man in a wrinkled suit stood up from the back row and stepped forward. "I was paid to erase a system," he said, voice not much more than a whisper. "And I did it, but I didn't know it would ruin hundreds of lives." Heads turned. The judge leaned forward. Clara's eyes sharpened. It was Franklin Yates, the former head of IT security for Sinclair Holdings. He hadn't been called to testify. No one even knew he was in the building. He cleared his throat, eyes darting to Vanessa and then to the prosecutor. "I was given directives in pieces, small ones, enough to think I was patching weaknesses, not building a trap. But I signed off on the kill code for Bite Bloom's infrastructure. That code, it destroyed real things, real people." There was no sound in the room, except the subtle shift of bodies leaning in. Vanessa watched him, her hands folded in her lap. His confession wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't clean, but it was real. Clara stood slowly. "We'd like to amend our witness list." "Your Honor, permission was granted." By midday, the courtroom had become something more than a legal setting. It was a reckoning, a place where silence no longer held value. When Vanessa took the stand, she didn't unfold notes or glance at pre-written lines. She looked ahead, eyes clear, voice low. "I was born into power," she began, "but I wasn't raised to question it. That was my failure. I thought comfort meant righteousness. I thought silence was safer." She looked down once, then back at the judge. Until now, from the gallery. Malik sat forward, his arms resting on his knees, his gaze steady on her. The opposing counsel, tight-lipped and professionally composed, shifted gears. They requested a recess, claimed political manipulation, claimed leaks, deep state interference, orchestrated timing. They asked for delay. But then the twist came. The lead prosecutor tapped the speaker system control. A new recording played. Richard's voice filled the courtroom, no static, no distortion, just plain and chilling. "If they push, we release the virus. That'll keep Bite Bloom under." The silence that followed was not disbelief. It was confirmation. The judge leaned back slowly, eyes unreadable. "We'll adjourn for the day," he said, "and I will be requesting federal review of all digital evidence provided." As people stood and murmurs rippled across the room, Vanessa stepped down, her feet heavy, but her heart clearer than it had ever been. She passed Loretta, who reached out and gave her wrist a soft, firm squeeze. Outside the courthouse, the wind had picked up again, autumn carrying its own kind of truth. Malik walked beside her as they pushed through the crowd. He didn't say much, just watched her expression. Then he spoke, quiet and certain. "You're not just undoing your father's sins. You're helping others believe again." The rain hadn't come back, but the air was soaked in something heavier, something between disbelief and fury. Outside the courthouse, the crowd had grown. Protesters stood shoulder to shoulder, clutching cardboard signs and cell phones. Their voices weren't always loud, but their presence was everywhere. A mother stood near the metal barricade, gripping a laminated photo of her son. His name was printed above a date that didn't stretch long enough. Her mouth didn't move. Her eyes did the speaking. Across the plaza. Clara stood with her arms folded, reading the headline on her phone, Richard Sinclair, eligible for bail, may return to Bay Village Estate. The tremble in her hand wasn't surprise. It was a delayed shiver of recognition. She'd known the system would tilt. She just hadn't thought it would tilt this fast. Vanessa walked up beside her, expression unreadable, behind them. Malik was in deep conversation with a local producer from WCPN, while Ray scrolled through feeds, muttering, "It's trending in 3 states already." The words didn't comfort anyone. Hook came fast and brutal when the mother near the barricade finally broke down. "My son died from a failed device, and he walks home free." Her voice cracked mid-sentence, as if the syllables themselves had been cut by grief. The crowd hushed, then rose in volume like surf behind her. Clara turned to the group, jaw tight. "We go public. Fully. No more leaks. No more encrypted archives. We release everything. Names, files, faces. If the courts stall, let the people carry it forward." Malik looked over from the edge of the sidewalk, where a young freelance cameraman was setting up. "I can get us a live stream slot. Public Square. Tomorrow evening." Vanessa nodded. She didn't need to speak. The room they were building wasn't made of wood or walls. It was pressure, building from beneath. Later that evening, they gathered in a quiet corner of Evan's temporary tech space, an old storage room turned digital hub inside a co-op bookstore 2 blocks from Playhouse Square. Laptops hummed in sync. Evan tapped through secured folders, uploading, double verifying, masking IP trails. Then he stopped. "There's movement," he said quietly. "They're scrubbing again." Clara stepped forward, scrubbing what every mirror link we've posted to the medical reports, the ones tied to Sinclair subsidiary domains they're redirecting. Somebody's using phantom DNS to redirect search traffic. It's all rerouting to health blog spam. And they're using fake Reddit threads to discredit ByteBloom. Vanessa exhaled sharply. So they're not waiting for the courts either. Ray swiveled in his chair, eyes fixed. "It's like the Hydra. You cut off one channel, 2 more grow back. We don't fight Hydras," Clara replied, calm but clipped. "We light the whole room. Just before midnight." Clara's phone buzzed once. No ID, no reply channel, just a text that hovered on her screen longer than it should have. "You opened the door. Now watch who walks through it." She showed it to Malik without a word. He read it twice, then slowly turned toward Vanessa. Outside, the wind picked up off Lake Erie, sending a rolling gust through the empty plaza, where tomorrow's reckoning was already waiting. Public Square looked like a wound that refused to close. The air was heavy but dry. The sky a dull, unflinching gray, typical Cleveland late spring, somewhere between thaw and tension. Folding chairs lined up in clean, rigid rows, but it was the faces that mattered. Faces of those who'd waited too long, who'd buried sons, daughters, companies, or dignity. They stood still, eyes not yet forgiving, but no longer turning away. Vanessa walked slowly toward the podium. No music, no fanfare, just the sound of camera shutters and a city that had held its breath for too many years. Behind her stood Clara in her navy coat, Malik in a worn brown jacket, Ray with his laptop tucked under one arm, and Loretta Johnson holding a folder of yellowed records. There were no suits, no publicists, just people who had bled data and dignity on someone else's spreadsheet. The hook didn't come with a gasp or outburst. It was in the way the crowd looked at her, not with admiration, not yet, but something closer to listening. "I didn't come here to defend my last name," Vanessa began. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "I came here to release it." She told the story without trying to convince anyone. The car accident that brought her to Malik, the USB drive, Ethan Greaves in the system that was supposed to be unbreakable. Her voice didn't shake when she said ByteBloom. She let the name sit there, let it echo. Malik took the mic next, a quiet shift that didn't need permission. He read names, each one hit like a soft thud. Denise Patel, Miguel Flores. Clara added a few of her own. Malik paused, looked out, and said, "We were labeled as underqualified. What we really were was inconvenient. We were silenced by someone who called himself a builder, but all he built was fear." The climax landed hard when Ray flicked on the mobile projector. A contract lit up the screen behind them, dated 3 days after Byte Bloom's collapse. The language was neat. Clinical acquisition of proprietary predictive infrastructure, automated API feeds, behavioral sync systems. It was Malik's code, sliced and rebranded under a shell company, traced back to Sinclair Holdings. Gasps weren't theatrical. They were tired, resigned. But then came the twist that no one planned for. From the edge of the crowd, Marianne Sinclair stepped forward. She wore no makeup, just a plain beige coat, hair tied back. Vanessa turned mid-sentence. Clara froze. Marianne held a typed page in both hands. Her voice was hoarse but steady. "I was the compliance officer for Sinclair Holdings for 12 years. I approved the financial frameworks used to house virtual assets across 7 jurisdictions, including the offshore setup in Florida. I lied on record to federal examiners. I signed off on valuations that never existed. I did this for survival. But silence is a currency too, and I've spent mine." No one interrupted. "I'll cooperate with any federal investigation," she finished. "I stayed quiet for too long. Maybe my daughter can still speak for both of us." For a moment, no one moved. The crowd stood suspended in the gravity of her voice. The cameras stayed fixed on Vanessa, but her gaze had already dropped. Malik reached over, his hand finding hers. She didn't pull away. And somewhere near the front row, a young boy, barely 10, hoodie sleeves too long, tugged at his mother's arm and whispered, "I want to build things too." Cleveland's courthouse stood still that morning, not because of the cameras or the journalists, but because something had landed, something final. After weeks of motions and delays, of posturing from lawyers and half statements from PR teams, Richard Sinclair stood to hear the final charges. 17 counts: wire fraud, securities manipulation, obstruction, conspiracy. He didn't speak, didn't shake his head, or look to his lawyer. He only looked at Vanessa once, brief, hollow, no plea in it. Then he lowered his eyes and signed the last paper. No one clapped, no one shouted. That wasn't the kind of story this was anymore. Vanessa didn't stay long. She left the courthouse by a side entrance, declined interviews, turned her phone to silent. She had made her stand already. Now it was time to build something else. Byte Bloom 2.0 opened 3 weeks later. It wasn't a tech firm, not exactly. They called it a non-profit education, outreach, training, but really, it was a recovery site, a place where people who'd been buried by systems could come and learn how they worked. It sat inside an old printing warehouse on Carnegie Avenue, windows long since replaced, wiring redone. A faded mural still stretched across the brick wall beside it, a child lifting a piece of sky. Vanessa didn't give a grand speech at the launch, just stood behind a folding table, hands clasped, and said, "This place isn't built from victory. It's built from everything we didn't let destroy us." Malik handled the logistics grant proposals, city permits, after-school partnerships. Clara managed legal onboarding for clients who didn't trust legal help anymore. Evan sat in the far room, running diagnostics and teaching encryption to teens who couldn't afford coding camps. Loretta Johnson volunteered as their first community liaison. Her badge was handwritten. Ray never took a title. He came and went, fixing wires, replacing routers, keeping the door unlocked when others might have shut it. Sometimes, when the day ran too long, he'd show up with a sack of pierogies and just sit. Everyone understood. On a quiet Thursday, a high school class from Detroit drove in on a field trip. They wandered the halls, looked at the screens, the resource wall with laptops from donations, the breakout room with beanbags and acoustic tiles. A white boy, with glasses, tugged on Malik's sleeve. "So, you really lost everything?" the boy asked. Curious, not cruel. Malik knelt so their eyes met. "I lost what they took," he said, "but I kept what matters." The boy thought about that, then nodded and walked on. There was no music that day, no press, just the sound of new boots on scuffed linoleum, a coffee pot bubbling in the break room, and a flag stirring outside in the wind. It read, Bite Bloom 2.0, in block letters stitched by hand. Behind it stood a team that had once fractured, burned, blamed, erased. Now they stood together, not for revenge, not even for closure, but for something far harder, a beginning. The old sign outside the building still creaked when the wind pushed it, but now it bore a name chosen, not inherited. Inside, the lights stayed on a little later. People lingered not out of duty, but out of belief. No grand speeches, no clean slates, just small steps, held together by a quiet kind of courage. Maybe the world doesn't reward that, but maybe it remembers. And maybe, in some quiet corner, someone else is watching, wondering if they too can begin again.